while ago I saw an exhibition there which is called Counterfeit, and taking it's originals, copies, and counterfeits, and it's about the counterfeit industry in the apparel field. And I thought it would be really great to look at that aspect, since luxury products are often faked, and you can't go down Canal Street without getting offered a whole bunch of different counterfeit products. So she agreed to come up here and tell us about her exhibition. She has a bachelor's degree in art history from St. Mary's in San Francisco, California, and she went on to get her master's degree at FIT, which is where she now works as assistant curator of costume and textiles.
So, all right. Okay. Can you guys hear me okay? Okay, so thank you everybody for having me. So to just give you a brief background about the museum. The museum at FIT, we're a fashion museum solely dedicated to the study of it. Our collection as a whole, we have, we're doing a current count, but right now we have about 50,000 pieces. So our costume collection, or our fashion collection, starts in the 1700s, and we go all the way to the present runways, as you'll be seeing. And we also have a wonderful accessories collection with well over about 2,000 shoes, and as you can see here. And then we also have a textiles collection, so everything from swatches of fabrics to actual yardages of material. So some of our exhibitions that we've had in the past is Shoe Obsession from 2013. And we also had another exhibition, Impact, 50 years of the CFDA. And then we had one on menswear. We also have a lovely menswear collection, but it very rarely gets highlighted. And this one was exploring where the Ivy style actually originated from. And then of course, you're probably very familiar with it if you look at Ralph Lauren, Tommy Hilfiger, even Tom Brown. So those are some of our exhibitions that have been in our special exhibitions. But Faking It, Originals, Copies, and Counterfeits is in our Fashion and Textile History Gallery. So this exhibition explores, I really wanted to go into both the idea of authorized and unauthorized copying. So a lot of people are quite familiar with the idea of unauthorized copying and counterfeits. The idea of authorized copying was something that most people are not as familiar with. So when you enter into the exhibition, you are greeted by the two Chanel suits, which have become the mascots for the exhibition. And with these two, while they look very similar, they're actually quite different from each other. So I'll be giving you just a brief overview of the exhibition if you weren't able to see it, and then we'll really get into the meaty topic of counterfeits. So with these two suits, as I said, they look very similar, but once you start seeing the insides of them, they're quite different. What I didn't tell you though is the suit on the left is the original Chanel suit from 1966. The one on the right is an authorized copy. Where it's authorized from, we're not sure, but it's quite likely that it was from Orbach's department store. Orbach was known to purchase licensed copies and create different samples of them for the ready-to-wear industry. And what they did also was they'd have different fashion shows. So they'd have fashion shows of the original sample that was purchased from Chanel, and then the copy that they made, so you could see how closely they have copied it. So as you look though on the insides, this is where you're really able to see all of the very fine details. And I found it quite interesting that it's still a very nice copy, but there are some of the differences. One of the signatures in a Chanel suit is of course the quilting on the inside, which actually holds the structure of the fabrics over time. And what I thought was most interesting though is typically in a Chanel suit they'll put a chain, and that actually weighs down the jacket, but in this case it wasn't necessary, but in the copy they still put that chain in, so it serves more of a decorative purpose. Then if we look at the blouses, the original one has a beautiful placket right here with all the different buttons, and then on the copy they had just put a zipper in the back. So the reasoning for this was probably to produce it at a lower cost so that they could sell that to their main demographic. And on the inside too, or if we look at the skirts, you can see that they're lined in a bit of a different fabric, but I thought also this decorative pink waistband was quite interesting. And then just to show how they actually had finished the piece too, that the lining on the original goes completely down to the hem, where on the copy it did not. So as we go through the exhibition, you'll see this is where the chronology of the exhibition starts. So I wanted to highlight, of course, I started with, on the left-hand side with Worth. And with Worth, what he did that was so interesting is that he actually started, similar to an artist, actually started signing his label. So similar to a work of art, once you sign it, it all of a sudden has this authenticity to it, and it has a value to it, as opposed to something that isn't signed. So then continuing on, we move on to, we have two pieces by Poiret, which I'll get into in just a moment. And then the piece in the center, the kind of seafoam color dress, is from Madeleine Vionnet. It's actually not by Madeleine Vionnet, though. It is an unauthorized copy of her Little Horse's dress. So this is one of her most famous dresses that she had created and one of her favorite dresses. And she actually worked with the beading house, the House of Lesage, to create a beading technique that was too difficult to copy. Of course, I always say when you start to challenge the counterfeiters and the copyists, you often lose that battle. And as you can see with this piece, that they had obviously copied it, but it was unauthorized. Then if we go all the way to the far right, we have the two pieces. The one on the left is from the Fashion Originators Guild, and this was a guild that was set up in 1938, and they had set it up, and the purpose for it was actually to protect fashion designers. So a fashion designer could register their garment, they would have a sketch of it, and what the Fashion Originators Guild did, they were almost like a policing agent, and they went to department stores and other places to make sure that no one was selling unauthorized copies or knockoffs of your designs, and if they would pretty much not manufacture, not sell to them anymore. Well, this was all well and fine until Congress saw it as eliminating the right to free competition, and then they had to disband in 1941. So that's probably the closest we got to protecting any fashion designers within the United States. So moving on to the Poiret piece, this was a really unique piece that we had recently acquired. Paul Poiret, most people are very familiar with his couture designs, but they're not familiar with his ready-to-wear designs. This was a very rare piece, and it was actually a piece of ready-to-wear that he was going to manufacture. He never actually did, though. So for him, he knew that a lot of people were copying his designs, and he thought that maybe this was a way that instead of buying a knockoff, you could just buy a ready-to-wear piece of his. So we have the piece on the far left, which is the one we recently acquired, but it also had two different colorways. The one in the center is from the Met, and it's in a black, and then it's lined in a beautiful cream. And the one on the far right is in the collection of the Museum of the City of New York, and as you can see, it has this beautiful royal purple, and then it has this emerald color that it's lined with. So in looking at it, we were trying to, I was working with our conservator, we were trying to figure out, well, is it an authentic piece? And we weren't really sure, and we were a bit skeptical, especially being the subject matter of counterfeits and of copies, because we didn't really know that Poiret ever produced this. He ended up not producing this collection because it was too difficult for him to travel from France and then back to the US, but we did luckily find this collection in the Met. And as you can see here, you can see the woman, and she is wearing the cloak, and it also had his label. So the label was very important. We don't have that, but his label was very important. We'll get into that in just a moment because our conservator did not think that it was an authentic piece. So then we continue on. On the left, we have some different authorized copies. The one on the left is from Orsilia, and that's a Cuban department store. And what most people aren't familiar with is that Cuba was actually the second largest importer of couture during the 1940s and 50s. And these are authorized copies from Pierre Balmain gowns. And then if you look in the center, we have the black dress, and then we have the champagne colored dress. The black one is an unauthorized copy by Nettie Rosenstein of Dior's New Look, and the dress on the right is from one of Dior's dresses, which she referred to as his Columbine dress. This one was an interesting conundrum in the museum because for a number of years, we had, the record in our museum system had said, Christian Dior with a question mark. And so I had to figure out, what does that question mark actually mean? Is it authorized? Is it original? Is it unauthorized? Well, luckily I was able to find a photo of it in Vogue, and the photo had said that Lord & Taylor and that I. Magnin had imported it in that year. Well, why some of our conservators are a bit skeptical was because the seams on the inside of the dress were actually paint as opposed to hand overcast, and in couture you'd always hand overcast all of your seams. And also the blend of the silk satin, it wasn't a pure silk satin, but it was actually a synthetic blend, so it was a rayon with a silk. And with Christian Dior, he would have probably never had a silk blend in there. We then continue on the left. We have some of the couturiers who are now starting their own ready-to-wear collections, very, very high-end ready-to-wear. But the piece on the left we have is from Christian Dior, and in 1948, so quite early after he started his couture collection, he started Christian Dior New York and simultaneously Christian Dior London. So this was his way that if you wanted to purchase, if you want to call it an authentic piece of close to couture, you could purchase it from his ready-to-wear boutique. And the red dress was from Jacques Fatt, New York. So Jacques Fatt had worked with the American manufacturer Joseph Halpert to produce a ready-to-wear collection, but it was a little bit more unique than what Christian Dior was doing. He actually came to the U.S. 2 times per year to produce this collection because he really needed to suit the taste of the American public. Most of the Americans thought that French couture or even French designs were way too avant-garde for them, so he had to tone it down just a little bit so it wouldn't be as avant-garde, but you could see it has this beautiful red brilliant color, so that's where he really gave it that little pizzazz for the American public. So the rest of the pieces, from the green coat all the way to the red coat on the end, those are all different licensed copies from various department stores throughout the US and then also Rome. But one of my favorite cases, and you can see there's the vinyl that's on the back wall. This was when studying about different knockoffs and counterfeits and unauthorized copying, one of my favorite cases. And it's also highlighted in Alexander Palmer's Couture and Commerce book. So this was Christian Dior's Margrave dress, also from his 1947 collection. And we could see that he, of course, allowed different department stores to copy it, and they purchased the license to copy that. We have from Henry Bendel, he had created a licensed copy of it, and here's the sketch of it. And then we also have from Bergdorf Goodman. So you can see Bergdorf Goodman started out, and they had sold theirs for $400 in 1948. And then we start to see the breakdown of it. So similar to the breakdown of a luxury bag all the way down to a counterfeit, we also have the breakdown of all the different knockoffs. So we go from $110 to $45 to lastly $8.95. What's interesting is that the $8.95 version came from Orbox. And Orbox was known to have a variety of different levels of, if you want to call it authenticity, or different levels of quality. So they did very, very nice licensed copies, such as the Chanel suit we saw very early on. And then they even did versions that, this one is pretty irrecognizable if you compare it with this piece right here, that they've completely eliminated all of the bows right here. But they would still say that maybe it was referenced by, or maybe even inspired by, Christian Dior. So somebody who we haven't discussed yet in the world of copying is, of course, what role does the press play? The press plays a very interesting role, and couturiers were extremely aware of the role that the press played, and they often did blame the press for why people were copying their designs. Sometimes they said that they would sneak a photo, or they would release photos too early. One of my favorite ones, though, is the one on the left of Christian Dior holding up his hand saying, "Please, please, please, no photographs in my atelier." Well, the couture salons, even today, are very, very secretive places, and they don't want people taking photos. They especially don't want their employees maybe selling their secrets, and this is the same for pretty much any luxury brand, whether if you're making a couture garment or if you're making a luxury bag. So with this, Christian Dior had even had signs in his couture house and in his couture salon that said, to copy is to steal, piracy doesn't pay, and copying kills the wage worker. So he really wanted even the workers to be very aware, because some of the times what they would do is they would actually take a couture dress and they would make a deal with somebody from the outside, and they would say to the person, they would pretty much steal the sample and they would give it to the person overnight. This person would completely deconstruct the dress from the seams, take all the pattern pieces, create a sample of it, and then they would stitch it back together, give it to the person who worked at Christian Dior, and then they would come back the next morning as if nothing happened. So he really wanted all the employees to be aware that please don't steal from the place where you're working. And then the photo that you see on the right, that is a photo from Paris Match, the Parisian magazine, and they had released this photo before the Chambre Syndicale. They had very specific dates set up, and they had released it too early. Well, a way to not get in trouble was to simply black out the design. So they were pretty much showing that they were the first ones, that they were at the Christian Dior couture show, and then to abide by the rules, they simply blacked out the designs, which somewhat defeats the purpose, because you want to see, well, what was shown at the Christian Dior store or show. But I thought it was quite interesting in a very humorous way of showing that you were at the show first. We then continue on. The pieces on the far left were quite interesting. The one on the left is from Balenciaga. The one on the right is from Givenchy. And what they had done in 1956 to protect their designs is they simply banned the press for 1 month. So they had a private show for all of their clients and for their department stores, people who were actually purchasing garments. And for all the press, they said, well, you can come back in 1 month. Well, they were pretty big couturiers at that point, so the press had to report on them. So if you were an American that was in Paris, you either had to stay in Paris for an extra month, or you simply had to then go from all the way from Paris, all the way, or from New York, all the way back to Paris, just to report on these two couture collections. Well, unfortunately, these collections were still copied and still knocked off that same season, so it was once again a nice try, but I always say when you challenge the copyist, you oftentimes lose. What you see is this grouping right here is the ready-to-wear story. We have Pierre Cardin, in the center is André Courrèges, and then we have Yves Saint Laurent. What's interesting is that when Pierre Cardin had released his ready-to-wear collection, he was actually banned from the Chambre Syndicale. They pretty much expelled him, and they said they didn't want him part of it. This is pretty much when we get into the later 60s, couture is pretty much dying out, and we're heading more toward ready-to-wear. But oddly enough, a few years later, Yves Saint Laurent had opened up his ready-to-wear boutique, Rive Gauche, and the Chambre Syndicale was all about it. They thought it was a wonderful way to translate the couture designs, and Yves Saint Laurent obviously was not banned from the Chambre Syndicale. These two, the one on the left is the dress is actually a original Pierre Balmain dress, and then what you see down below is a sketch from Bergdorf Goodman. So what I thought was interesting is we've seen the licensed copy and then maybe the photo of the original, and this right here is the reverse. So what I was curious to know is, well, how closely did they actually copy it? And in the photo, everything is exactly the same, from the color of the dress to the details of it. What's incredible is that all the black pieces you see on this dress and the plaid pattern, this is all velvet, and it's on a silk satin ground. So it is probably one of the most luxurious textiles I've seen recently, and they use that same textile in the Bergdorf Goodman version. And then the piece on the left is a rare ready-to-wear collection where Lord & Taylor had convinced Givenchy to create a small sample of ready-to-wear versions based off of his couture collection, and they also convinced him to actually produce it in his atelier in Paris. So this was ready-to-wear but made in Paris at a very high level, and then it was exported then into Lord & Taylor. We then come to Chanel, and Chanel was an interesting case study for this exhibition because in the 1930s, she had teamed up with Madeleine Vionnet, and they had this wonderful case where they had sued this French woman who was creating a number of sketches. So she'd pretty much go to the couture salons and she would watch the shows. She would then go to her house, she would sketch, I think close to each show, she would sketch about 50 different sketches, and during that time, sometimes they'd have up to 200 different looks. So she would sketch 50, and they had found her over a period of about 15 years. They had found something absurd, like 30 or 40,000 sketches in her apartment, and obviously Chanel and Vionnet had won that case. But when we start getting into the 1960s, Chanel has a little bit of a change of heart. By that point, she's pretty well established, and she's kind of okay all of a sudden with people copying her. And one of my favorite quotes from her is she said, quote, "Fashion should slip out of your hands. The very idea of protecting the seasonal arts is childish. One should not bother to protect that which dies the minute it is born," end quote. So for Chanel, she was pretty much okay with it, but I think the fact that she was so well established that it was almost free promotion for her. And then you'll see the grouping that's on the far right. These are different diffusion lines. So we have on the left is Moschino and then Sheep and Chic. we have Donna Karan and DKNY, and then we have Missoni and then Missoni for Target. So it's quite interesting to see how the quality actually degrades as we get closer and closer to the Missoni for Target collection. The Missoni for Target, the quality compared to the original is pretty much irrecognizable. The knitting is completely different, the fabrics are synthetic as opposed to silk, and it's not sold in Missoni, but it's sold for Target, and the price point is quite different. That the Missoni for Target is maybe $30, maybe $40, and the Missoni original piece is probably close to maybe even a few $100s, so maybe closer to $800 to maybe $1,000. We then have this platform, and this was dedicated to fashion designers that are copying fine artists. And this was the one loophole where most of the people were not sued, and so most of the fine artists once again kind of saw it as free press for them, or more of an homage to. And my favorite grouping is, of course, this Mondrian grouping. So Mondrian was one of the designers, one of the artists who was so heavily copied and still copied today. I was doing different searches, and I had found that you could get everything now from Mondrian bikini to Mondrian makeup, but my favorite was you could make your own Mondrian loaf of bread, and it had all of the other blockings, the color blockings. And I said, I'm not sure how you make that, but it looked really interesting. So we have in the center Yves Saint Laurent's Mondrian dress from 1965, and on the left and on the right are two of the unauthorized versions from it. What you can't see in the photo, but in person, what Yves Saint Laurent did when he created this dress is all of those pieces, the color blocks, they're all separate pieces that had to be stitched together. The ones on the left and right, only the color blocks are separate pieces, and they simply just top stitched a black braid on top to make it look different. So even the quality is quite different. But then we have, if you look on the left, there's a pair of boots, and those, there was an ad I recently found, and it said, if you want to have boots in the style of Mondrian and Yves Saint Laurent and Courrèges, here's a pair of boots for you. And I think that they were very inexpensive, so a lot of people had these versions. Now, I always say, whenever somebody says that something is the first, to always be a little bit aware, because oftentimes you always find somebody who created or invented something a little bit before. So Yves Saint Laurent had created his Mondrian-inspired dress in 1965. If we look to the right, we have a little Sally Victor, a little cloche hat.